Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath the smoky rafters of a medieval Irish farmhouse where the glow of a peat fire throws shadows across rough-hewn walls, and every smell clings to the air. Burnt oats, wet wool, maybe a hint of animal in the corner. You're about to sit at the table of people who lived and died centuries before you, and, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this diet if you tried it today. The rough barley loaves, the endless porridge, the questionable hygiene. Let's just say your modern gut would be writing angry emails to customer service within a week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're awake enough, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm always curious where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your bare feet crunch over the rushes that cover the dirt floor, and the first thing you notice is the smell of smoke. It isn't the kind of cozy campfire scent that makes you want to roast marshmallows. It's sharper, harsher, like it's been trapped in these rafters for years. That's because there's no chimney in this house. The smoke just swirls around until it oozes out of the thatch above. Your eyes sting, but don't worry, you'll adjust. Everyone here does. If nothing else, you might find your lungs get a medieval smoked cure. The hearth is the beating heart of the home. You crouch beside it, watching as a blackened cauldron bubbles with something thick and beige. That's the food of the day, the week, maybe even the whole month. Porridge made from oats or barley. Forget variety, this is sustenance. A splash of sour milk or a sprinkle of wild herbs can make it feel festive, but mostly it's plain fuel. You scoop a wooden spoon into it, and the grain sticks stubbornly, steaming in the cool night air. Now here's a mainstream fact. For much of medieval Ireland, oats were the staple crop, not wheat. Wheat was for the wealthy, imported and pricey. Oats and barley kept bellies filled, especially in the damp Irish climate where wheat sulked and sulked like a picky houseplant. So, when you imagine the medieval Irish table, picture more oat cakes than fluffy white bread. But let me toss in a quirky tidbit for you. Some records suggest that butter wasn't just food, it was buried in bogs, sealed in wooden kegs and left there for months or years. Why? To preserve it, of course, but also maybe to give it a stronger, tangier flavor. That bog butter dug up centuries later is still technically edible. Not that I'd recommend spreading thousand-year-old butter on your toast, unless you want to win the weird flex but okay Olympics. As you sit with this family, you notice how food equals survival, not indulgence. The parents break their portions carefully, always making sure the little ones are fed first. You chew slowly, the porridge clinging to your teeth, and try not to look longingly at the occasional hunk of cheese sitting on a shelf. Cheese isn't everyday fare here, it's a treat, something to stretch the milk surplus. And here's where the debate kicks in. Historians still argue whether medieval Irish peasants lived in near constant scarcity, or whether their diet, though simple, was actually pretty healthy by the standards of the time. After all, oats and dairy do cover a lot of nutritional bases, and with foraged greens and the odd fish, you might avoid scurvy, though you'd still be wishing for a Snickers bar around mid-afternoon. You lean back, listening to the quiet crackle of the fire. Outside, rain patters on the thatched roof, and the air is heavy with damp earth and peat. This isn't a feast. This is daily life, steady and repetitive, but also the foundation of survival. You feel the weight of it, this rhythm of grain, milk, and the occasional blessing of meat, and you realize something humbling. In a world without freezers, food courts, or convenience stores, every bite is hard-won, grown, tended, and fought for. Still, don't get too gloomy. After all, even here, people joke, laugh, and tease each other across the table. Maybe someone makes fun of you for fumbling the spoon. Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. Food might be scarce, but humor is free. And if you can't laugh at your porridge, well, what can you laugh at? The morning light cuts through the gaps in the wooden shutters, and you rub your eyes as the smell of oats greets you yet again. Congratulations! You've survived one full day on the medieval Irish peasant menu, which means you've had porridge for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And, plot twist, you're about to do it again today. You shuffle toward the hearth, because that's where all meals live and die, and find the cauldron reheated, the same beige glue waiting inside. It's reliable, it's filling, and yes, it's about as exciting as watching moss grow on a rock. You dig into your portion, and maybe this time it's livened up with peas or beans boiled into the mush. Legumes are the sidekick of the peasant diet. Garden peas, lentils, broad beans, all cultivated in small patches behind the cottage. They bulk up the meal, add protein, and, if you want to get fancy, can even be mashed into pastes that sort of resemble spreads. Don't get your hopes too high, though. It's more gritty bean paste than smooth hummus. Still, you take what you can get. A mainstream fact to anchor us here: the diet of medieval Irish peasants leaned heavily on what could be grown and stored easily. Oats, barley, peas, beans, and kale-like greens were the unshakable backbone. Meat was rare. Fish and dairy popped in when available. The rhythm of life was tied tightly to these humble staples, which meant everyone, from toddlers to elders, shared in the same meals. Now picture yourself trudging into the garden patch, pulling up onions or leeks to throw into the cauldron. Those aromatics add flavor, sure, but also act as rough medieval medicine. People believed onions could cure everything from coughs to the plague. Spoiler, they couldn't. But they did make porridge smell slightly less like wet cardboard. And here's your quirky tidbit of the day. Nettles, those prickly green weeds you usually avoid, were actually a key foraged ingredient. Boil them down and they lose their sting, turning into a spinach-like green. Packed with iron and vitamins, nettles may have kept peasants healthier than you'd think. Medieval superfood right under your itchy nose. As you carry your bowl back to the hearthside, you notice the way meals shape the rhythm of the day. Eating is practical. Get it down, keep moving. People rise with the sun, eat to fuel labor, and work until dark. You follow along to the fields, where a small community is bent over, turning earth with wooden plows pulled by oxen. Every bead of sweat that drips from their foreheads is basically a down payment on tomorrow's porridge. Midday comes, and the meal isn't elaborate. It's the same porridge base, maybe cooled into a sliceable slab you can hold in your hand. You chew it like a cereal bar from the year 1100, only this one tastes like sadness with a hint of barley. Still, it fills your stomach, and you soldier on. That's the peasant grind. Endless repetition with small, shining moments of variety. Sometimes, though, there's a treat. Someone has a little honey scraped from wild hives hidden in hollow trees. A drizzle of golden sweetness turns the gray porridge into something bordering on delicious. Kids' eyes light up, and suddenly the whole cottage hums with chatter. It's proof that even a spoonful of luxury can transform the mood of an entire family. Here's where historians still argue. Did peasants live constantly on the edge of starvation, or were they more resilient and resourceful than we give them credit for? Archaeological digs show surprisingly strong bones and decent health indicators, suggesting the diet, while monotonous, kept people alive and even thriving by medieval standards. Others argue that famines, crop failures, and disease were frequent enough to keep most folks perpetually anxious about food. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. Evenings bring a return to the hearth, the same cauldron bubbling with slightly different additions. You hear stories told as bowls are passed around, myths of heroes, battles, and cattle raids. Maybe someone cracks a joke about how tonight's porridge tastes exactly like last night's, because medieval humor is basically food-based stand-up. And here you are, spoon in hand, laughing along, realizing that even monotony can feel warm when shared. You lean back, your stomach heavy with grain, the smoke curling above, and you begin to appreciate how this daily grind of oats, pulses, and garden greens isn't just survival. It's culture. It's community. It's the glue that binds families together, literally as sticky as the porridge clinging to your spoon. The seasons tug you forward whether you're ready or not. You step outside the cottage and find yourself ankle-deep in damp grass, the morning mist curling low across the fields. It's planting time, and the rhythm of life shifts around the calendar of soil, seed, and hope. The ground feels heavy beneath your feet, and you realize that everything you've been eating inside, that endless parade of porridge and beans, depends on this exact moment. One bad sowing, One stretch of nasty weather, and suddenly your wooden spoon is scraping an empty cauldron. You join the villagers as they dig furrows with simple wooden plows tipped in iron. Oxen strain and snort, while behind them, seeds are scattered by hand. Oats, barley, peas, they all go into the earth, with silent prayers muttered over every handful. You can't just run to the market if this fails. You've bet your whole year's meals on the fickle moods of Irish weather, which, let's be honest, isn't exactly famous for its predictability. Here's a mainstream fact. The agricultural year in medieval Ireland was marked by festivals that celebrated planting and harvest. Lugnasa, for example, in early August, was a festival of first fruits. People marked the start of the harvest season with fairs, games, and yes, actual feasting, at least when the gods of weather played nice. It wasn't just about food, it was a cultural anchor, reminding everyone that survival was tied to collective labor. But before you get too cheerful, remember the flip side of this cycle, the hunger months. You trudge back into the cottage in late spring, when the grain stores are almost gone, and the new crops are still green in the fields. The pot is thinner, the porridge watery, the beans carefully counted out. This is the lean season, when every bite is stretched and meals shrink. Parents skip portions so children can eat. Your stomach growls louder at night, and suddenly the workday feels longer. You hear whispered stories of foraging. Families slip into the woods to collect berries, wild garlic, mushrooms, or hazelnuts. Some scrape bark, some chew on roots, and yes, nettles again, because nothing says culinary adventure like stinging yourself before dinner. People adapt, but you feel the strain in the air. Now for your quirky tidbit, in times of desperate scarcity, some communities supposedly boil down tree bark or mix ground-up ferns into their grain to stretch meals further. Imagine porridge with a garnish of, well, pine. Not exactly Michelin star material, but better than starving. As summer rolls in, the fields green and swell with promise. You walk among ripening barley, and your heart lifts at the thought of full bellies again. The scythes swing, the sickles gleam, and the harvest begins with a frenzy of cutting, bundling, and stacking. The whole village moves like a single machine. Everyone works, from children tugging at sheaves to elders binding the straw. It's exhausting, backbreaking, but the joy is palpable. You can taste hope itself in the air. By autumn, the grain is threshed, the peas dried, and the stores filled again. Relief washes over the community like warm milk. For a little while, food feels abundant and meals grow richer. Cheese wheels roll out, smoked fish gets shared. Maybe even a small joint of pork appears on the hearth. You bite into a rare, juicy piece of meat, and it's so different from the daily porridge that your taste buds practically throw a party. And yet, historians still argue whether medieval Irish peasants actually suffered from frequent famines, or whether the cycles of hunger were just accepted seasonal realities. Some argue that the damp, temperate climate made the land unusually resilient, with wild foods supplementing diets more than we assume. Others insist that every bad harvest sent ripples of panic through communities, leading to desperate improvisation and sometimes starvation. The truth likely wobbles between those extremes: plenty in good years, misery in the bad. Winter comes, and you huddle once more by the fire. Outside, the fields sleep under frost, and while inside, the family pulls out stores from wooden bins and clay jars. Dried peas clink into the cauldron, salted fish gets rehydrated, and hard cheese shaves into the pot. Meals feel heavier, slower, made to stretch through the cold months. Every bite carries the memory of summer labor. You realize, spoon in hand, that you're not just eating food, you're eating time itself. Spring sowing, summer tending, autumn harvesting, winter storing. It all collapses into the bite of a single barley cake. The cycle binds you in, forcing you to respect the soil and the weather in ways your modern fridge has made easy to forget. Still, you grin to yourself as someone jokes about how even the cows look bored chewing the same cud all year. Medieval comedy, low effort but relatable. Your wooden spoon scrapes against something that isn't porridge for once. It's flatter, denser, and smells nutty with a faint sweetness. Someone pulls around from the griddle, and you blink at the sight of bread. Not the fluffy loaves you know, all springy crumb and golden crust, but a compact disc made from barley or oats. It's smoky from the fire, slightly gritty between your teeth, and still warm in your hands. You bite down, and suddenly the whole cottage feels more festive, as if this simple cake is a holiday by itself. Bread sits right at the center of medieval Irish life, and you soon learn that its form depends entirely on your status. Peasants like the family you've joined rely on barley, oats, or rye, grains that grow easily in Ireland's damp soil. Wheat? Forget it. That's reserved for nobles, monasteries, or anyone wealthy enough to import the grain at ruinous cost. Wheat sulks in the wet climate like a cat in the rain, and only the rich can afford the effort. So when you think of medieval bread here, don't picture crusty baguettes. Picture humble, dense, chewy cakes cooked on a griddle over peat fire. A mainstream fact worth holding on to. In early medieval Irish law texts, barley bread appears frequently as a unit of exchange or description, almost like currency. A fine might be measured in so many loaves or so much barley. Food wasn't just eaten, it was a way of calculating value, a system of edible accounting. You follow someone into the small shed at the edge of the yard, where sacks of grain are stored. The air smells earthy and faintly sour, because here's the secret to better bread: barm. That's the frothy yeast skimmed off the top of ale brewing, which bakers mixed into their dough to help it rise. Without barm, you'd be chewing flat cakes forever. With it, you might get something a little airier, a little closer to the bread you know. Picture it as medieval multitasking. Drink your ale, then use the leftovers to improve dinner. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some stories suggest that oatcakes were sometimes baked directly on flat stones pulled from the fire, which gave them a faint mineral tang. Imagine eating your bread with a little bonus gravel flavor. Delicious? Maybe not. But hey, at least you can claim you're tasting the terroir centuries before foodies made that phrase cool. You notice quickly that bread isn't just food, but ritual. At the noble table, wheat bread is a mark of prestige, almost glowing pale against darker fare. At monasteries, monks bake loaves, not just for themselves, but for travelers, pilgrims, and the poor, following religious duty. And at the peasant hearth, bread marks the difference between surviving on watery porridge and feeling like you've stepped up in the culinary world. Still, historians still argue whether barley bread was universally despised as poor man's food, or whether for many it was just normal and even preferred. Some texts mock barley bread as rough and coarse, while others suggest it was eaten widely without shame. Was it really humiliation on a plate, or just the standard carb of the day? The debate simmers like porridge, unresolved but tasty to chew on. By evening, you watch as more cakes are pressed flat on the griddle, puffing slightly, their edges darkening to near black. The smell fills the cottage, earthy and comforting. Children grab at them eagerly, parents ration carefully, and you chew along, your jaw working overtime. It's filling if not glamorous. You sip a little ale alongside it, the malty tang mingling with the smoky bread. Later, sitting by the fire, someone teases that if you eat enough of these barley cakes, you'll grow a beard of oats. It's the kind of joke that's been told 1,000 times, and yet the whole room chuckles. Bread may not be glamorous, but it binds people, sparks laughter, and keeps the belly from gnawing itself in the long night. You lick the last crumbs from your fingers and think about how every culture makes bread its own way. Here in medieval Ireland, it's dense, smoky, and modest, but also central, a literal cornerstone of daily life. And tomorrow morning, when the cauldron reheats and the griddle warms again, you'll be back to tearing off chunks of barley cake, grateful for every chewy bite. The smell hits you before you even open your eyes. Warm, sour, and buttery all at once. Someone's been busy at the churn, and you stumble over to see the tall wooden barrel rocking back and forth as a woman pumps the dasher up and down. Her arms are steady, rhythmic, and after what feels like forever, she pulls the lid off to reveal thick, pale butter clinging to the sides. You're handed a finger's worth, and it melts instantly on your tongue. Salty, rich, and so much more luxurious than yesterday's barley cake. Milk is the real star of this landscape. Cows, goats, and sheep aren't just animals. They're portable pantries. The Irish climate, damp and green, is perfect for grazing, which means dairy flows almost endlessly in season. Fresh milk, though, doesn't keep long, so you find yourself surrounded by its transformations. Butter, soft curds, hard cheese, and something like buttermilk that's tangy enough to make your lips pucker. Here's your mainstream fact. Medieval Irish law tracts go into astonishing detail about dairy. Butter in particular was treated as wealth, used in rents, tributes, and even as part of fines. Imagine paying off a debt not with coins, but with lumps of golden butter wrapped in leaves. Suddenly, your fridge feels like a medieval bank vault. You're invited outside to taste something stranger, sour milk, left to clabber in clay pots until it separates into thick curds and whey. You wince, expecting it to taste spoiled, but it's surprisingly refreshing. This isn't an accident, it's intentional, a way to extend milk's life and turn it into something sturdier. People drink whey too, sometimes mixed with herbs or honey. It's protein, it's hydration, and it's a far cry from your oat milk latte back home. Quirky tidbit time, bog butter. Yes, I mentioned it earlier, but now you see how it's done. Someone hauls a small keg, sealed tight, and explains how butter was buried in peat bogs to preserve it for months or even years. The bog's cool, oxygen-poor environment acted like a natural fridge. Archaeologists have dug up bog butter that's centuries old, sometimes still smelling faintly edible. The real question isn't, could you eat it, but should you? Spoiler, you probably shouldn't unless you want to star in the next episode of Medieval Food Dares. You sit with the family as they dip barley bread into bowls of soft cheese, crumbly and tangy. It's a rare treat, and the children scrape their bowls clean. Butter is smeared thickly, cheese shared carefully, every bite a reminder that animals are lifelines. Without cows, goats, and sheep, this household would be nothing but grain and roots. And here's where historians still argue. Was medieval Ireland unusually dairy-heavy compared to its neighbors? Or was it simply one part of a broader mixed diet? Some argue that the Irish lean more heavily on milk than most of Europe, thanks to the perfect pasture conditions and cattle-based economy. Others insist that while dairy was important, it didn't dominate quite as much as we sometimes imagine. Either way, when you taste the butter melting on warm oatcakes, you're convinced these folks knew exactly what they were doing. Later that night, by firelight, you notice how dairy isn't just food, it's identity. Cows aren't only milk givers, but status symbols, wealth markers, and dowry material. To lose a cow is to lose security. To gain one is to climb a rung in the invisible social ladder. And butter, golden, fragrant, carefully churned, carries the weight of survival and pride. Someone cracks a joke as they hand you another slab. Eat enough butter, and you'll slip right through the door without opening it. The laughter rings warm, and you lick your fingers, realizing this golden spread is more than flavor. It's power. You wake to the sound of snuffling and lowing outside the cottage. When you step into the morning mist, there they are. Pigs rooting in the mud, sheep clustered like a shaggy cloud, and cows lumbering slowly across the green field. It's like the medieval version of a neighborhood grocery store. Only these groceries wander around, bleat at you, and occasionally refuse to cooperate. Meat, you quickly realize, is complicated. Everyone wants it, but not everyone gets it in equal measure. For the peasant family you're staying with, pork is the most common option. Pigs are low maintenance, happy to eat scraps and forage in the woods, and their meat can be salted or smoked to last through winter. When a pig is slaughtered, the whole community joins in, because nothing goes to waste. Blood, fat, organs, even the feet get cooked down into something edible. The feast day after a pig killing is one of the rare times you actually feel stuffed. Here's a mainstream fact. In Brehon law, the old Irish legal system, cattle weren't just food but currency. Wealth was literally measured in cows. To injure, steal, or kill someone's cow meant serious fines, sometimes entire herds as repayment. Beef itself, however, was rarer on the common table. Cows were too valuable alive, producing milk and offspring, to be casually slaughtered. So while the elite might enjoy roast beef at banquets, peasants mostly looked at cows as walking treasure chests, not dinner. You sit near the sheepfold one evening, and someone hands you a piece of mutton stew. It's oily, rich, and surprisingly hearty. Sheep provided wool first and foremost, but older animals eventually made their way into the pot. The flavor is gamey, stronger than pork, and you chew slowly, savoring what feels like a rare luxury. Quirky tidbit for you. There are tales of warriors being honored with heroes' portions of meat at banquets, sometimes entire cuts of beef or pork presented dramatically. Refusing or mishandling this portion could cause offense, even spark feuds. Imagine your Thanksgiving dinner devolving into a sword fight over who gets the drumstick. Still, for most people, meat is rare. Your daily meals are porridge and bread. Meat only arrives with festivals, hunts, or when an animal has to be culled. And here's where historians still argue. Did peasants truly eat meat only a few times a year? Or was it slightly more common thanks to pigs, small game, and occasional communal slaughter? Some argue that records exaggerate scarcity to highlight noble privilege. Others insist that scarcity was very real, with the taste of meat memorable precisely because it was so infrequent. Tonight, though, you're lucky. A pig has been butchered, and the air fills with the scent of roasting. Fat drips and sizzles into the fire, sending up sparks. You bite into a juicy chunk, salty and smoky, and for once, your stomach doesn't complain about porridge. Everyone eats with greasy fingers, laughing as children lick their hands clean. And just as you're wiping your own mouth, someone jokes, "Careful, eat too much pork, and you'll start snorting in your sleep." You laugh, full and drowsy, grateful for the rare chance to feel truly satisfied. The animals outside might be wealth, wool and milk most days, but tonight, they are supper. And the memory of this feast will linger long after the fire dies. You wander toward the edge of the village, where the land softens into marshy ground, and suddenly the air smells different, briny, sharp, alive with salt. The sound of gulls cuts overhead, and before you know it, you're standing at the shoreline, waves slapping against rocks. For inland peasants, fish might be an occasional catch from a stream, but here the sea stretches like an endless pantry. You roll up your sleeves because tonight's menu is about to shift from land to water. Down by the tide, families bend low, baskets in hand, prying limpets and mussels from stones. Children squeal as crabs scuttle sideways across wet sand, destined for boiling pots. It's messy work. Your hands smell of brine, your knees are soaked, and your stomach rumbles at the thought of what's coming. A fire is already smoking, and you watch as mussels are tossed straight onto the embers, shells popping open like tiny treasure chests. You slurp one down, salty and smoky, and instantly understand why coastal life had its culinary perks. Here's your mainstream fact. Fish was a crucial part of the medieval Irish diet, particularly during Lent and fasting days enforced by the church. With meat forbidden on many days of the year, fish ponds and fishing rights became valuable assets. Monasteries, in particular, cultivated elaborate systems of fish ponds to keep supplies flowing, ensuring that monks could follow fasting rules without actually starving. A fisherman grins as he holds up a glistening salmon, caught upriver with a woven trap. Salmon runs were legendary, feeding entire communities at certain times of the year. You imagine the thrill of pulling such a heavy, silvery prize from the water, enough to turn a plain evening into a feast. Smoked over peat fires, salmon became a trade good, carried inland to nobles who wanted a taste of the coast. Now for your quirky tidbit, there are accounts of people eating seal and even porpoise in medieval Ireland, often at monastic sites. Not exactly your go-to seafood platter, but in a world where fasting rules counted anything from the water as fair game, monks got creative. Imagine biting into roast dolphin under the solemn gaze of your abbot. Technically holy, but definitely chewy. As night deepens, you sit with villagers around a pot of fish stew. The broth is thin but fragrant with leeks and herbs, the fish flaking apart easily in your mouth. Everyone eats quickly, hungrily, their faces glowing in the firelight. You think of inland peasants, far from the shore, relying mostly on oats and dairy. Here at least, the sea gifts variety, though storms and rough seas can snatch it away just as fast. Historians still argue whether seafood was truly a staple for all medieval Irish, or mostly limited to coastal and monastic communities. Some evidence points to widespread fishing networks. Other scholars suggest inland peasants had little access to fish unless preserved or traded. What's clear is that for those who lived near water, the bounties shape both diet and identity. Someone nudges you with a wink as they hand over another mussel. Careful, eat too many and you'll start spitting seawater. You laugh, crunching down on the smoky morsel, realizing that here, food doesn't just fill the belly, it ties you to tide and river, to the rhythm of waves and to the endless push and pull of the sea itself. The bell tolls faintly in the distance, and you follow the sound until the stone walls of a monastery rise before you. Inside, life runs on rules, prayers at set hours, silence in corridors, and, most importantly for your stomach, fasting that shapes every meal. You slip into the refectory, where long wooden tables stretch beneath flickering candles. Monks in rough habits sit quietly, bowls before them, waiting not for conversation, but for scripture to be read aloud as they eat. The meal arrives, and here's your first surprise. No meat. The church forbids it on many days of the year, and in some houses of stricter discipline, it's banned entirely. Instead, you're served fish, legumes, bread, and a thin vegetable broth. At first you groan inwardly, another bowl of watery peas, but then you notice the ingenuity at play. Herbs brighten the flavor, onions add sweetness, and the bread is crustier than the peasant cakes you've been gnawing. These monks know how to make simple food sing. Mainstream fact, Irish monasteries were famous for their fish ponds, carefully engineered to provide a steady supply of eels, trout, or carp. These weren't just puddles with fish flopping around. They were sophisticated systems with channels, sluices, and breeding strategies. A monastery could feed itself year-round with carefully managed ponds, proving that fasting rules didn't mean living on crumbs. As you slurp broth, a monk sets down a plate of what looks suspiciously like scrambled eggs. Technically, eggs were sometimes permitted, though rules varied wildly. Some communities banned them outright, while others allowed them on fast days as long as they weren't fried in butter. You can practically hear medieval monks debating over breakfast. Brother Aidan, that's too runny. It still counts as indulgent. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some places, beaver tails were eaten during fasts because they were considered from the water. Yes, you heard that right. A furry rodent tail sizzling in a pan somehow passed as seafood in the eyes of medieval clerics. Monks, it turns out, could be surprisingly creative loophole hunters. As the day passes, you notice how the rhythm of fasting shapes everything. On Wednesdays, Fridays, and during Lent, no meat passes your lips. Advent and other holy seasons extend this restraint. The effect isn't just physical but spiritual. Eating less, eating differently, is meant to focus the soul. You chew slowly, imagining the centuries of devotion built into every bland spoonful. But historians still argue whether Irish monks followed the fasting rules as strictly as the text suggests. Some evidence points to quiet indulgence, hidden meats, or local leniency. Others believe the discipline was genuine, especially in early medieval monastic centers that prized asceticism. The truth may depend on the house, the abbot, and how hungry everyone was. Evening falls and you walk the cloister, your stomach not exactly full, but strangely content. There's something calming about the predictability here. Bread, fish, beans, prayer, repeat. You realize that fasting isn't about deprivation so much as rhythm, about tying daily life to sacred cycles. One young monk grins at you as he hands over a wedge of cheese with a whisper. Don't tell the abbot, this is our secret blessing. You both laugh quietly, the sound echoing off the stone, and you bite into the sharp dairy, reminded once again that even the holiest kitchens have a mischievous streak. Smoke rises thick from the great hall's central hearth, and as you step inside, the whole world changes. Gone are the cramped cottages and simple hearth stews. You're now standing in a noble household where food is not just fuel but spectacle. The air is hot, crowded, and alive with clatter. Spits turn slowly over the fire, dripping fat into the flames. Knives flash in the hands of cooks. The scent of roasting meat, spices, and fresh bread makes your mouth water instantly. This isn't one or two people cooking, it's an army. Specialized servants bustle about, bakers kneading dough, brewers tending vats, carvers sharpening blades, and even a cupbearer rehearsing his role. Food here is performance, and the kitchen is backstage. You watch in awe as an entire pig is basted with honey and herbs, its skin turning golden and crackling. Compared to the smoky oatcakes of the peasant hearth, this is culinary theater. Mainstream fact, Noble kitchens in medieval Ireland and across Europe were highly organized, with staff divided into clear ranks. There were cooks for meat, cooks for pastry, brewers for ale, and stewards who oversaw the whole production. Meals weren't slapped together. They were orchestrated like a military campaign, with timing and hierarchy as strict as on a battlefield. One servant shows you a platter of fresh fish, brought in on horseback from the coast earlier that day. Salt preserves some, but for tonight's banquet, only the freshest will do. Eels wriggle in a basket, waiting for the pot. Beside them lie rounds of cheese, baskets of fruit, and jars of honey. The sheer abundance feels almost indecent after the thin porridge you've been enduring. Quirky tidbit: there are records of food dyed with bright colors to dazzle guests. Saffron rice, green-dyed custards, even peacocks cooked, then redressed in their own feathers to look alive on the platter. Imagine your host proudly unveiling a roast bird that appears ready to strut off the table. Talk about dinner with a jump scare. As the feast begins, you sit among nobles at long trestle tables. Servants move with practiced choreography, laying down trenchers, flat slabs of bread that double as plates. On these, stews and meats are heaped high. You tear chunks off with your hands, juices running down your fingers. Ale flows in wooden cups, mead glitters golden, and every course feels like a performance designed to impress. Historians still argue whether these grand banquets were frequent affairs or rare, staged spectacles meant to display wealth and power. Some say noble households dined lavishly almost nightly. Others suggest true excess was saved for guests, weddings, and high feasts. What's certain is that when nobles threw a banquet, they made sure you'd never forget it. You glance up at the high table, where the Lord and his honored guests sit elevated, their portions larger, their meats choicer. It's a clear reminder, food is hierarchy, as much a social tool as a physical need. What you eat, how it's served, and where you sit. All of it broadcasts your place in the world. Someone nudges you with a grin as a servant carries in yet another roast pig. Better eat fast, or the Lord's hounds will beat you to it. You laugh, tearing into your trencher, grease shining on your hands, and realize that in this hall, food isn't just nourishment. It's power, prestige, and performance rolled into one unforgettable meal. You slip away from the heat of the noble hall, your belly still heavy with meat and mead, only to find yourself drawn toward a different kind of table. In the distance, you hear laughter, the rhythmic beat of drums, and the clash of mugs. You follow the sound and suddenly you're swept into a medieval Irish feast. Part banquet, part festival, part chaotic carnival. The long tables stretch as far as you can see, and the mood here is less rigid formality, more joyful chaos. The first thing that hits you is the noise. Poets chant verses that roll like waves, musicians pluck harps and blow horns, and storytellers spin tales so vivid you almost see the heroes leap from their words. Between them, servants weave through the crowd carrying platters piled high. Roasted venison, steaming cauldrons of stew, wheels of cheese, and endless baskets of bread. The whole place hums with energy, like a medieval music festival where the entry ticket is an empty stomach. Mainstream fact: feasting in early and high medieval Ireland was central to politics and culture. Kings and lords hosted large gatherings to cement alliances, reward loyalty, and show off their wealth. A well-fed guest was a loyal guest, and sharing food was as binding as any contract. Poets, known as Fílad, often played crucial roles, praising the generosity of their host in verse. Because nothing ruins your reputation faster than a hungry bard with a sharp tongue. You're handed a horn filled with mead, honey-sweet and warming. You drink deeply, the liquid golden and sticky on your lips, and suddenly you understand why poets get carried away mid-ode. At the next table, someone claps a stranger on the back, swearing eternal friendship over a shared trencher of roast goose. These aren't just meals, they're memory-making machines. Now for the quirky tidbit. At some feasts, whole animals were cooked in wild, theatrical ways. There are tales of a cow stuffed with a pig, stuffed with a sheep, stuffed with a goose, stuffed with a chicken. Think medieval turducken, but on steroids. The mere sight of such a monstrosity would have left guests gasping or loosening their belts in preparation. As the night wears on, entertainment keeps rolling. Harpers play melodies that tug at your heart, while jesters juggle and acrobats tumble between benches. The hall smells of roasted meat and spilled ale, a sweet, sour perfume of indulgence. You bite into a piece of venison, rich and gamey, and find yourself swaying to the harp, belly and heart equally full. Historians still argue whether these feasts were truly as extravagant as the tales suggest, or if poetry exaggerated reality to flatter patrons. Some accounts sound like over-the-top bragging contests, while archaeology shows more modest fare. Maybe the truth is both. Some feasts were wild displays of abundance, while most were simpler but still festive. At your side, a storyteller leans close and whispers with a grin, "Eat, drink, and remember this. Nothing is forgotten if a bard sings it." You laugh, tearing another hunk of bread, realizing that here, food and story intertwine. Every bite becomes legend, every cup of meat another verse, until even you feel immortal for one glowing, noisy night. The feast lingers in your memory as you step outside into the cool night, only to find your path leading not to more food, but to the market square. By dawn, the space is alive. Voices shouting, animals bleating, merchants haggling over piles of goods. The smell is overwhelming. Smoke from roasting chestnuts, tang of fish just pulled from the sea, sharp bite of onions, sweetness of honey. You're in the middle of a medieval Irish market, where food isn't just eaten, it's traded, bartered, and bargained into circulation. You pause to watch a farmer unload sacks of oats from a creaking cart, his goods bound for both peasant tables and noble kitchens. Beside him, a woman ladles butter into wooden tubs, golden and fragrant. At another stall, beeswax candles gleam, and jars of honey sparkle in the early sun. The hum of business here is as essential as any harvest. You realize quickly that no matter how fertile the land, survival depends on networks of exchange. Mainstream fact: medieval Ireland developed a sophisticated barter system, with food often functioning as currency. Cows in particular were central, not just for milk and meat, but as living units of wealth. Legal texts even recorded fines and debts measured in cattle. To pay in butter, honey, or salted fish wasn't unusual. The marketplace ran as much on edibles as on coin. You test your haggling skills with a fisherman selling barrels of salted herring. He insists it's worth a small fortune, since preserved fish can travel inland to monasteries or noble houses. You counter by pointing at a nearby brewer's stall, where ale froths in oak casks. He laughs, offering to throw in a smoked deal if you sweeten the deal. You shake your head, though honestly, smoked eel doesn't sound half bad. Quirky tidbit: in some places, cheese wheels were stamped with distinctive marks, almost like medieval brand logos, to prove authenticity at market. Imagine holding up your round of cheddar and boasting, "See this cowhead stamp? Best dairy east of the Shannon." Even centuries ago, branding mattered. The deeper you wander, the more exotic things become. Spices from distant lands, pepper, cinnamon, saffron, arrive through tangled trade routes, rare and costly. Only the wealthy can afford them. But here, in tiny cloth packets, they dazzle the imagination. You hold a pinch of pepper to your tongue and nearly choke, coughing as a merchant laughs at your watery eyes. First time, eh? Worth its weight in silver. Historians still argue whether everyday peasants ever tasted such spices, or whether they remained locked in noble kitchens. Some evidence suggests occasional trickles downward through trade or gifts, while others insist they were purely elite luxuries. Either way, the very presence of pepper at this market feels like a hint of far-off worlds reaching Irish shores. As you wander, a boy tugs at your sleeve, holding out a honey cake. It's sticky, crumbling, and clings to your fingers, but you bite in and grin. Sweetness, even a tiny piece, is worth a handful of coins. Around you, voices rise and fall, coins clink, and bartering continues in an endless rhythm. You step back, watching the dance of exchange, grain for fish, butter for ale, cheese for wool. It's not just survival, it's community, trust, and the invisible threads that tie villages, monasteries, and noble halls together. And in that moment, you realize food isn't only about what you eat, it's also the story of how it moves, from hand to hand, from field to table, from cow to coin. You wander away from the noisy market stalls, following the road until it dips into farmland once more. Here the pace slows, and you notice how food is not just eaten or traded, but carefully preserved. Because in a land of unpredictable weather, with winters that gnaw at both belly and spirit, preservation is survival. You step into a cottage and the first thing you notice is the smell. Smoky, sour, salty, sweet, all tangled together in the air. Against one wall hangs meat, darkened by weeks of smoking over a peat fire. Fat drips slowly, hissing as it hits the embers. You tug a strip of bacon from its hook, chew, and feel the salty tang cling to your tongue. In the corner, a barrel of salted fish waits, brine so strong it makes your eyes water. You realize quickly that preservation is less about deliciousness and more about making sure food still exists when nothing grows outside. Mainstream fact: medieval Irish households relied on salting, smoking, drying, and fermenting to extend the life of their food. Without these methods, surplus from harvests or hunts would rot long before it was needed. Butter was often packed into wooden tubs or stored in bogs, where the cold, anaerobic conditions could preserve it for years. Yes, bog butter is real, and yes, archaeologists have actually dug it up. A woman offers you a taste of fermented oats, left to sour into a tangy gruel. It's not exactly champagne, but it's surprisingly refreshing, like a medieval smoothie with a sharp bite. Nearby, jars of honey-glazed fruits gleam, proof that sweetness could be stored for lean times. You pop one in your mouth and nearly sigh. It's like eating sunlight in the middle of winter. Quirky tidbit: sometimes excess butter was shaped into massive blocks, wrapped and buried in peat bogs as a form of storage, or possibly ritual offering. Imagine stumbling across a 100-pound lump of butter centuries later. Technically edible, though you might want to check the sell-by date first. The rhythm of the seasons dictates everything here. Autumn is a frenzy of salting, smoking, and drying as families scramble to prepare for winter. Spring leans on the stores that survived. Summer brings fresh milk and greens, easing the hunger gap, and harvest fills the larders once more. You sense the constant tension. One bad harvest, one failed preservation, and hunger looms. Historians still argue whether preserved foods were staples for everyone or more of a backup strategy. Some suggest peasants leaned heavily on preservation year-round. Others believe fresh foods dominated whenever possible, with preserved items pulled out only in times of need. Either way, the evidence of bog butter and smoked meat points to serious investment in keeping food around. A child tugs at your sleeve, proudly showing off a string of dried apples hung above the hearth. They're leathery but sweet, and you nibble one as the child beams. "That'll be for winter," she says, her voice almost solemn, as though repeating a family mantra. As you leave the cottage, you realize that preservation is as much about hope as hunger. Every smoked strip of bacon, every salted fish, every hidden tub of butter is a promise, an insurance policy against the cold, a quiet assurance that the family will make it through the long, dark months. Your path now takes you away from the smoke of cottages and into the open green, where great wooden palisades rise against the sky. Inside the fortress walls, life feels heavier, more guarded, but also richer in its flavors. Here among kings and high lords, food is not just nourishment or trade. It's a symbol of authority, wealth, and divine right. You step into the great hall, and instantly you're swallowed by the spectacle. At the center sits the king, his high table groaning with delicacies. Platters of roasted swan, golden brown and glistening, are carried forth by servants with straight backs and lowered eyes. Bowls of spiced broth shimmer with saffron threads, imported at staggering cost, and alongside them sit wheels of fine cheese, honeycombs dripping amber sweetness, and fruits gathered from orchards you didn't even know existed in this land. You glance down at your own trencher and nearly laugh. This is dining in another universe. Mainstream fact: feasts hosted by Irish kings weren't just about filling bellies. They were political statements. The more abundant and exotic the food, the stronger the message. I control wealth, land, trade, and loyalty. Guests left with full stomachs and fuller respect, or envy, reinforcing bonds that kept the kingdom together. You reach for a slice of bread, only to realize it's made from fine sifted wheat flour, not oats or barley. Soft, fluffy, almost sweet on the tongue, It's the kind of bread peasants might never taste in a lifetime. Beside it, golden goblets brim with mead and imported wine, each sip shimmering with prestige. You drink and feel the weight of centuries pressing into the cup. Quirky tidbit: some royal feasts allegedly featured food sculptures, elaborate presentations where bread, pastry, or even roasted animals were arranged into shapes of castles, ships, or mythical beasts. Imagine being served a pastry dragon that belches steam from hidden coals inside. Not exactly subtle, but definitely memorable. As the banquet unfolds, poets rise to chant long, winding verses praising the king's generosity. Musicians pluck harps that make the hall tremble with sound, while jesters tumble, their antics half comic, half political satire. Even the act of serving food is staged. The king is offered the choicest cuts by designated carvers, a ritual display of status. You tear into a slice of venison and suddenly realize every bite is politics disguised as dinner. Historians still argue whether these feasts were genuinely extravagant on a regular basis or whether chroniclers exaggerated them for effect. Some archaeological digs suggest impressive, but not endless, abundance, while written accounts speak of halls drowning in food. The truth likely lies between spectacle and practicality, lavish enough to awe, careful enough not to bankrupt the king. You lean back, dizzy from flavor, and glance toward the high table. The king lifts a cup and the hall falls silent. He speaks of loyalty, of shared kinship, of the bonds of feasting. The words blend with the taste of honey and spice on your lips, and you realize this: here to eat at the king's table is to be bound by oath, by memory, and by the promise of shared survival. At your side, a noble leans in, whispering with a smirk, "Careful, you eat too much, and they'll think you're angling for a crown." You laugh, licking grease from your fingers. But part of you wonders, in this hall, maybe even a meal can change the shape of kingdoms. By now, your belly has traveled from peasant porridge to royal swans, but your journey isn't finished. You wander out into the misty fields again, where the landscape itself whispers stories about food. Hillsides ripple with furrows, meadows buzz with bees, and dark forests hide game. Every path you take reminds you that medieval Irish diets weren't just about social class. They were deeply tied to the land, the sea, and the turning of the seasons. You pause at a riverbank where women kneel, washing baskets of freshly pulled leeks and onions. The smell of sharp green fills the air, and you can almost taste the broth they'll become. A boy nearby carries hazelnuts in a sack, cracking a few between stones, the rich, oily flavor lingering on your tongue. Wild foods matter here. Nuts, berries, herbs, mushrooms, all forage to fill gaps in the diet. It's a reminder that no matter how carefully fields are planted, nature's pantry always has the final say. Mainstream fact: early Irish law texts, known as the Bran Laws, contain detailed rules about land use, farming rights, and even food production. They reveal a society where what you could grow, gather, or graze wasn't just survival. It was law. Disputes over cattle, honey, or fishing rights could spark feuds just as easily as battles over land. You wander into a field buzzing with bees, where a beekeeper tends his hives. Honey is more than sweetener here. It's medicine, currency, and the base for mead. He hands you a comb, sticky and golden, and you bite into it, waxy but bursting with sweetness. Compared to the salted meats and sour oat gruels, it feels like a miracle on your tongue. Here's your quirky tidbit: there's evidence that some Irish people drank a fermented mix called quirm, made from oats, herbs, and honey. Think of it as an early craft beer, brewed with whatever was at hand. The taste? Probably unpredictable, ranging from pleasantly fizzy to, "Oops, this batch might kill you." You sip a mug and decide it leans closer to the latter. As you move through the landscape, you sense how deeply rhythm and cycle matter. Summer means milk in abundance, cows fresh with calving, butter churned daily. Autumn brings grains and apples, the urgency of harvest before frost. Winter tightens belts, leaning on smoked meats and dried fruits. Spring, the hardest season, is often called the hungry gap, when stores run low and fresh crops aren't yet ready. Historians still argue whether Irish diets were more plant-based than animal-heavy overall. Some claim meat was a luxury, except for the elite, Others argue that cattle culture meant beef and dairy were more central than we assume. What's certain is that survival demanded balance between field and forest, between feast and famine, between what could be cultivated and what could be foraged. You pause at the edge of a bog where turf is cut and stacked for fuel. A local grins as he points to a patch. Somewhere under there lies butter older than your great-grandmother. You chuckle, remembering the bog butter you tasted earlier, and wonder if every field hides a secret larder beneath the moss. As twilight spreads, you sit on a stone, chewing a handful of hazelnuts while watching cattle move across the horizon. Their low calls echo in the cool air, a sound that feels like heartbeat and history at once. In this moment, you understand. Food here isn't just cooked and eaten. It's embedded in the soil, the streams, the bees, the seasons. Every mouthful carries the taste of Ireland itself. The journey has carried you from the smoky hearth of a peasant's hut to the dazzling feasts of kings. And now, with your feet weary and your senses nearly overwhelmed, you find yourself reflecting on all the flavors, textures, and rituals you've passed through. Food, you realize, is more than survival. It's the pulse of a people, a mirror of their struggles, triumphs, and imaginations. You sit at the edge of a quiet village green, where the embers of a communal fire glow low. Children lick honey from their fingers, old women sip thin broth, and a bard plucks a harp, his voice soft against the night. You taste the smoke in the air and recall the endless bowls of oat gruel, humble yet sustaining. You remember the tang of sour milk, the greasy richness of pork, the briny snap of mussels plucked from the shore. Mainstream fact: the medieval Irish diet was rooted in dairy, oats, and pork, with regional variations shaped by coastlines, forests, and rivers. Archaeological evidence, coupled with law tracts and poetry, paints a picture of a cuisine both practical and symbolic, where food was as much about identity as it was about nourishment. Your mind drifts to the stranger tidbits: the bog butter slumbering underground, the monks munching seal under fasting rules, the nobles dyeing custards in wild colors, the feasts where animals were stuffed within animals like edible nesting dolls. Food, it seems, was also play, invention, and sometimes outright loophole hunting. You chuckle at the thought. Medieval people weren't so different after all. And yet historians still argue whether the Irish table leaned toward abundance or scarcity, toward simplicity or extravagance. Was the average peasant perpetually on the edge of hunger, or more resourceful than we give credit for? Were kings truly drowning in saffron and swan, or were poets just really good at exaggerating? The truth, like a half-empty bowl of stew, probably depends on where you sat. The harp fades, and so does the bustle of the day. You lean back, belly full from your imagined journey, realizing that what you've tasted isn't just food, it's centuries of memory. Every bite is tied to land and labor, to law and laughter, to ritual and rebellion. And as you close your eyes, you sense how these meals shape not just bodies, but stories, and even nations. The fire softens to a glow, and your breathing slows with it. You let the clatter of feasts and markets fade, replaced by the gentle hum of bees in summer meadows, the lowing of cattle across fields, the quiet drip of brine in a wooden barrel. The sharp edges of hunger and abundance blur into something gentler, a rhythm older than memory. You picture a hearth at night, smoke curling lazily through the roof hole, a pot of oats simmering steadily. The air is warm, the shadows long, and every sound seems softened, as if the world itself is whispering you toward rest. Food no longer feels urgent or political or ceremonial. It is simply comfort, waiting in the dark, ready to greet you in the morning. The seasons roll gently in your mind's eye. Spring blossoms trembling in the breeze, summer grass tall and bright, autumn fields heavy with grain, winter frost shimmering under the moon. Through each, you carry the quiet assurance that meals will come, humble or grand, shared with laughter or silence. The rhythm is steady, like your own heartbeat, like the slow drift into sleep. Your body loosens, your thoughts stretch thin, and the last taste lingers, a blend of honey, smoke, and meadow air. The feast is over, the hall is quiet, and the night is yours. Let the stories fade, let your eyes close, and let yourself drift, full of memory, full of calm.